Before we put all the pistons into their cylinders, before I did this whole entire thing, I labeled every cylinder from 1 through 5 and then 6 through 10. So we'll take piston 1 and we'll take piston 10 because these are the corresponding pistons. And you have to be mindful that these valve pockets on each piston, they're supposed to be facing towards the center of the motor, right? So they're supposed to be facing each other this way. If this piston 1, this piston 10, the little valve pockets are gonna be facing each other this way. Another way to tell, these piston caps have an arrow pointing forward. All these arrows are supposed to be pointing to the front of the motor, which means you have to be mindful of the rods. See the rods? They have a flat side, they have a completely mirrored side to them, and then they have a side with these engravings and this, right? These mirrored sides are supposed to be the ones facing each other. The mirrored sides are supposed to be rubbing on one another because obviously pistons aren't fully aligned. They're a little bit off center from one another. So the mirrored sides are supposed to be facing themselves when they're rubbing, and a good way to check is to make sure the valve pockets are facing each other, and then you go down and make sure that these are facing themselves. And you go through every pair of cylinders and make sure that that is the case, because if it's not, it means your rods are flipped and you gotta redo it. So make sure the arrows are pointing forward, and make sure the valve pockets are pointing towards themselves, and the mirrored finishes are pointing towards the mirrored finishes. Okay, to put the pistons in, it's important the portion of where the rod bearing is going to be connected to, the crank, you want it at the lowest, the closest to the oil pan as possible. Just because when you're going to be pushing the piston in, you don't want the rod to hit this polished surface and scratch anything, so you just want to be mindful of that. So first things first, you want to lubricate the cylinder wall. If you remember this little tool I had right before, right, it's just cloth on a stick, so you wouldn't really get your hands dirty. Be generous with it. Take the corresponding piston, remove the cap. These bolts are trash, we're not reusing them. Just as a precaution, I marked the rod and the connecting part to it, just so that when the piston's in, you can tell which side goes where and you wouldn't have to mess anything up. Take your piston, and BMW clarifies this specific order, right? The lowest piston ring, this lower one, needs to be facing away from the pocket valves. The opening of the second ring has to be right where this right one is, this valve pocket, this right one. And then the top ring, the opening of that should be the complete opposite. So it should be kind of like in a triangular shape, the openings, right? We want to lubricate all the surfaces that are going to be rubbing against the cylinder wall, just so that these pistons, when they're going to be going in, it's going to be going in real nice and smooth. Next, you want to take this tool that you can pick up anywhere, any part store. This is a piston clamp. Open it up to where it's not going to be too much, but so that the piston actually fits in. And what I like to do, I like to leave the piston sticking out just a little bit so that it can actually seat into the cylinder wall. You lay it down and you start tightening it. Make sure that all the piston rings are tight and they're in their seating positions. Give it a little bit of squeeze. Make sure that this is sitting nice and evenly with the rest of the surface. Occasionally check up on the rings, tighten it to the max. Double check from the outside to see if any piston rings are sticking out. If they are sticking out and they're not in their seating position, you'll know because this won't clamp up all the way. Right before we move on, go ahead and lubricate your rod bearing. I use assembly lube, lubricate it all the way around, nice and evenly. And then we come up to the cylinder wall. Make sure that the valve pockets are facing inside of the motor. Carefully and gently put it in. Seat down this whole tool all the way down to the actual block so that the piston rings don't have any play of when they're going back in. And then what I like to do, because these are a little bit difficult, you take the soft end of a hammer and you give it some taps. Make sure that it's hitting nothing on the backside. Boom, just like that, you can see the piston's fully in. All the piston rings are sitting nice and smooth. You know that because it moves freely, but it's not even all the way. So you go to the backside, the underside, and you can definitely readjust everything. You wanna push the piston in kind of as deep as you can without, really touching the surface of the crankshaft. There we go. You know, rotate the crankshaft until the rod just kind of naturally slides into its position. And then you take the end cap, clean off the surfaces, make sure that the markings that you've made align with where you're putting it in, lubricate it. Remember, this mirrored surface needs to be, in this case, facing up because there's going to be another rod over it. So you gently push it in. Make sure that the piston rods and the end caps align nice. You take a brand new bolt, you oil it up, clean it up, make sure it's all good, just like so. Put it in, give it a few twisties, and then just do it hand tight. I've done them all hand tight up until this point. I didn't torque them to spec at all yet. And just like that, this piston is already in. It's all nice and freely moving with no resistance besides the cylinder walls and the piston rings. Finish them all up, and then we're going to be torquing them up to spec. Torque specs, since these are brand new bolts, we have to stretch them out. So what I'm doing now, you're gonna have to repeat it 2 more times after. So it's 3 times total. I've already stretched out a few bolts here, so I'm just gonna show you the one-time torque specs for this. First time, you torque it to 6 Newton meters. That's a seating torque. You torque simultaneously like that. Next torque is 20 Newton meters. You torque it down, just like that. Next up is 130 degrees. If you remember in our previous video, we were doing clearances, you're gonna remember this tool. You wanna set it down, seat it so it touches the surface and it goes against it when we're torquing it. For me, this is my final torque, but when you're using brand new bolts, you have to do this exact process 3 times total. Put your wrench, zeroed it out, and you torque it to 130 degrees. Just like so. You repeat this one on that, and that's that. And you do the same for everything. You do it 3 times if you're using new bolts, which I'm assuming you are. I'm not using APR. A lot of people recommend APR, but I just went with OEM. And yeah, you do this procedure 3 times on each section, and that should be it. Well, that's gonna do it for this video. As you can tell, we still have a bunch more work to do for this motor, and I can't wait to do this because, dude, this is inspiring, it's insane, it's motivating, man. The more you do this kind of stuff, the more it motivates you. So hit that subscribe button, share, like these videos, help the word spread, you know what I'm saying? So let's keep it coming, and there's a bunch more stuff we're doing, so stay tuned. Thank you, peace.